Marcus nodded slowly, absorbing my candor with unexpected appreciation. Thank you for being honest. It's refreshing. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass thoughtfully. Dad would never admit this, but watching Prism succeed has been difficult for him, not just as a competitor, but as a father who prides himself on recognizing potential. The waiter approached with menus, but Marcus waved him off with a polite request for a few more minutes. Once we were alone again, he continued, his voice lower. You should know something before tomorrow's meeting. The Henderson discussions are further along than you might realize. He met my gaze directly. Term sheets have been drafted, not signed but prepared. A chill ran through me despite the restaurant's warm atmosphere. An acquisition? They're calling it a strategic merger, but yes, Henderson would be the surviving entity. Cartwright would become their East Coast division, eventually fully absorbed under their brand. I took a careful sip of wine to mask my shock. My father selling the family legacy was almost unthinkable. Dad would actually consider this? The board is considering it, Marcus corrected carefully. Dad is conflicted. The practical business case is compelling. Henderson's scale, their Asian presence, their existing technology infrastructure. But surrendering the Cartwright name. He shook his head. It goes against everything he's built his identity around. Why are you telling me this? Marcus studied me for a long moment. Because despite everything, you're still a Cartwright. And because I believe your proposal might offer an alternative path, one that preserves the family legacy while acknowledging market realities. You support the Prism partnership? I couldn't keep the surprise from my voice. I support maintaining Cartwright's independence and relevance. He leaned back as the waiter returned. We ordered quickly, risotto for me, osso buco for Marcus, our appetite for food secondary to the conversation. When we were alone again, Marcus continued. The wealth management industry is transforming exactly as you predicted 5 years ago. Our traditional clients are aging. Their children, our future client base, expect technological integration that we simply don't offer. Our competitors are evolving while we're calcifying. His assessment matched my own analysis, though hearing it from Cartwright's CFO carried particular weight. Have you expressed these concerns to Dad? Repeatedly, with increasing urgency over the past 18 months. A flash of frustration crossed his features. He acknowledges the issues intellectually, but hesitates on implementation. Hence the Henderson discussions, outsourcing the evolution we've failed to manage internally. I considered this new information carefully. Tomorrow's meeting is more significant than I realized. It's potentially decisive. If we can't develop a convincing modernization strategy, the Henderson option gains momentum by default. Our food arrived, steam rising from the perfectly presented dishes. We both made a pretense of beginning our meals, though the conversation had suppressed my appetite. The Prism platform could be implemented within 90 days, I said, thinking. Aloud. Full client migration within 6 months. Minimal disruption, preserved branding, enhanced capabilities. That timeline would be critical, Marcus nodded. The next board meeting is in 45 days. If we're presenting an alternative to the Henderson option, it needs to be fully developed by then. The significance of we wasn't lost on me. After years on opposite sides of the family business divide, Marcus was proposing alliance. You're positioning yourself as an advocate for the Prism partnership. I'm positioning myself as an advocate for Cartwright's independent future. He set down his fork, dropping all pretense of eating. Julia, be honest. Can your platform deliver what we need? Not just the technological capabilities, but the seamless transition our client base would demand? These are conservative investors who value stability above all else. Yes, I answered without hesitation. We've successfully migrated 8 wealth management firms to our platform. including 3 with client bases similar to Cartwright's. We have a proven implementation methodology specifically designed to minimize disruption. Marcus nodded, seemingly reassured. Good. Then here's what you need to understand about tomorrow. Dad will be evaluating 2 things simultaneously: the business proposal and you personally. Me? Whether you've matured beyond what he perceived as idealistic technological enthusiasm into a pragmatic business leader. Whether you can be trusted with the relationships he spent 40 years cultivating. Marcus held my gaze steadily. And whether your return to the family business sphere is motivated by vindication or vision. The assessment was perceptive and likely accurate. My father would indeed be evaluating multiple layers simultaneously. And what will you be evaluating, Marcus? He smiled slightly, recognizing the counterpoint. Whether Prism's platform truly represents our best path forward, or merely the most emotionally satisfying one. Fair enough. One more thing. Marcus hesitated, then forged ahead. David will be at the meeting. I couldn't contain my surprise. David? Why would he be involved in a technical assessment? He barely understands how email works. Politics, Marcus replied simply. Dad's positioning this as a general strategic discussion, not specifically a Prism evaluation. David's technically our director of strategic initiatives, though his actual contributions are. He trailed off diplomatically. Non-existent, I supplied. Marcus shrugged slightly, neither confirming nor denying. He's still Dad's son, and still very threatened by your success. The warning was clear. David would likely be an antagonistic presence in tomorrow's meeting, possibly actively undermining the partnership possibility. I appreciate the heads up. We're still family, Julia, despite everything. Marcus finally took a proper bite of his meal. Now, let's eat before it gets cold. And tell me more about this platform of yours. In plain English, not tech jargon. For the next hour, our conversation flowed more naturally than it had in years. I explained Prism's core capabilities, translating complex technological concepts into business outcomes. Marcus shared insights about Cartwright's current client concerns and operational challenges. By the time we finished our espressos, we had informally outlined the framework for a potential partnership that addressed both companies' core needs. As we prepared to leave, Marcus surprised me with an unexpected question. Do you miss it? The family business? I considered this thoughtfully. I miss certain aspects, the history, the sense of purpose that spans generations, but I don't miss the constraints, the constant pressure to maintain rather than innovate. That's changing, Marcus said quietly. Partly due to your success forcing us to reconsider, partly due to market realities. The question now is whether we change together or apart. We parted with a genuine hug and a shared sense of cautious optimism about tomorrow's meeting. As my car navigated the city streets toward my downtown apartment, I found myself reflecting on the unexpected shift in family dynamics. Marcus's outreach suggested possibilities I hadn't dared consider. Not just a business partnership, but a genuine family reconciliation. The thought was simultaneously appealing and unnerving. For 5 years, I'd defined myself partly in opposition to the Cartwright legacy, finding strength in differentiation. Reconciliation would require redefining that identity, integrating, rather than separating my personal and professional selves. When I reached my apartment, I found an email from Elena with the final presentation deck for tomorrow's meeting. I reviewed it carefully, making minor adjustments to emphasize the aspects Marcus had identified as critical: implementation timeline, client experience continuity, and tangible performance metrics. By the time I finally went to bed, the presentation was polished to perfection, addressing both the technical requirements and underlying psychological concerns. Sleep, however, proved elusive. The prospect of tomorrow's meeting, with its complex interweaving of business strategy and family dynamics, kept my mind cycling through potential scenarios. Would my father approach the discussion with genuine openness or merely go through the motions while already leaning toward Henderson? Would David attempt to undermine the proposal? Would Marcus's apparent support manifest in the actual meeting? Thursday morning dawned clear and bright, the autumn air crisp with possibility. I dressed with deliberate care, a charcoal gray suit that projected serious professionalism without appearing severe, accessorized with my grandmother's pearl earrings. The subtle nod to family tradition was intentional, a visual reminder of my connection to the Cartwright legacy despite our professional differences. Elena met me at Prism's offices, accompanied by Raj Patel, our integration specialist whose calm demeanor and encyclopedic knowledge of wealth management systems made him ideal for addressing technical concerns. We reviewed our approach one final time before departing for the Westlake Hotel. "Remember," Elena advised as our car approached the venue, "they need this partnership more than they're willing to admit. Their market position is eroding while ours is strengthening. That gives us leverage, regardless of family dynamics." "True," I agreed. "But we want a partnership, not a capitulation. The goal is mutual benefit, not victory." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The Westlake's Executive Conference Center occupied the top floor of the historic hotel, offering panoramic views of the city skyline and harbor beyond. We arrived 15 minutes early to set up our presentation and review the room layout. I deliberately arranged the seating to create balance, neither Cartwright nor Prism at the head of the table, but positioned equally on opposite sides. At precisely 9:57, the Cartwright contingent arrived. My father led the group, impeccably dressed in his signature navy suit, his expression professionally neutral, though his eyes betrayed surprise at finding us already prepared. Marcus followed, nodding slightly in my direction before taking his place. David entered next, smartphone in hand, barely glancing up as he slumped into a chair. The final member was Lawrence Wilson, Cartwright's longtime CTO, whose skeptical expression suggested he viewed this meeting as an unwelcome obligation rather than an opportunity. "Julia," my father greeted me formally, extending his hand across the table. "Thank you for arranging this discussion." "Thank you for considering it," I replied, matching his professional tone. "I believe there's significant potential benefit in exploring collaboration." Brief introductions followed, though they were largely ceremonial. Both sides were well aware of the key players. As coffee was served by the hotel staff, I noticed Lawrence eyeing Elena with professional curiosity. Her reputation in financial technology circles had grown substantially over the past 2 years, and having left Google to co-found Prism, had raised eyebrows throughout the industry. My father opened the discussion with practiced authority. "Before we begin, I want to establish clear parameters. This meeting is exploratory only. Cartwright is considering multiple strategic options for technological enhancement. We've made no commitments and have no predetermined outcomes in mind." The statement was standard negotiation positioning, establishing that they had alternatives and weren't desperate for our solution. I nodded acknowledgement without challenge. Of course. We approach this as a potential opportunity for mutual benefit, not a foregone conclusion. Prism partners with wealth management firms whose client profiles and service philosophies align with our platform capabilities. We're as interested in determining fit as you are. A flicker of surprise crossed my father's face at this framing. I had positioned Prism as the selective partner rather than the eager vendor. David snorted quietly, earning a sharp glance from Marcus. "Perhaps you could begin by outlining exactly what your system does," Lawrence suggested, emphasizing system in a way that subtly diminished its significance. "Certainly." I nodded to Elena, who activated our presentation on the room's display screen. For the next 30 minutes, we provided a comprehensive overview of Prism's platform, its core architecture, key capabilities, implementation methodology, and demonstrated results with existing clients. Elena handled the technical components with precision, while I focused on business, outcomes, and client experience. Raj provided specific examples of successful migrations, emphasizing how we maintained service continuity during transitions. Throughout our presentation, I observed the varied reactions from the Cartwright team. Lawrence's initial skepticism gradually shifted to reluctant interest as Elena detailed our security protocols and compliance frameworks. Marcus maintained an expression of thoughtful assessment, occasionally nodding at particularly relevant points. David alternated between checking his phone and making dismissive notes, his disengagement obvious. My father was the most difficult to read, his expression revealing nothing as he absorbed the information. Only his eyes, intently focused and occasionally narrowing at specific claims, suggested active evaluation rather than passive reception. When we concluded the formal presentation, my father leaned forward slightly. Impressive capabilities, certainly. But wealth management isn't merely about technological efficiency. It's about relationships built on trust, developed over generations. How does your platform preserve the human element that distinguishes firms like Cartwright? The question went to the heart of the traditional wealth management philosophy and the core concern of firms considering technological integration. I had anticipated it precisely. That's exactly the right question, I acknowledged. Prism was specifically designed to enhance rather than replace the client-advisor relationship. The platform handles computational tasks, portfolio optimization, tax efficiency analysis, risk assessment, freeing advisors to focus on the strategic and emotional aspects of wealth management that truly require human judgment and empathy. I turned to a specific slide showing client satisfaction metrics. Our partner firms have seen a 34% increase in meaningful client interactions after implementation. Advisors spend less time generating reports and more time discussing life goals, family dynamics, and legacy planning, the elements that create genuine client loyalty. Lawrence frowned slightly. But doesn't automating portfolio management ultimately diminish the advisor's perceived value? Quite the opposite, Elena interjected. Modern clients, particularly next-generation inheritors, expect technological sophistication. They question the value of advisors who don't leverage advanced analytics. Our platform actually enhances advisor credibility by equipping them with insights and capabilities that match or exceed what clients can access through retail investment platforms. Marcus nodded in agreement. That aligns with feedback from our younger clients. They increasingly ask why our recommendations should outperform algorithm-based alternatives. Algorithms are just math, David suddenly interjected, his tone dismissive. They can't replace 40 years of market experience and relationship building. I turned to address him directly, maintaining a collegial tone despite his obvious hostility. You're right that algorithms alone aren't sufficient. That's precisely why Prism combines computational power with human judgment. The platform doesn't replace expertise, it amplifies it. That sounds like marketing speak, David countered. Bottom line, how many of your current clients have achieved better returns than they had with traditional management? The direct challenge created a momentary tension in the room. Everyone knew David was attempting to create a confrontational dynamic, but the question itself was legitimate. 87%, I replied calmly. Average improvement of 2% annually on risk-adjusted returns. But more importantly, 94% report higher satisfaction with their overall wealth management experience. Because ultimately, superior returns matter only if clients stay with you long enough to benefit from them. My father, who had been observing the exchange carefully, redirected the conversation to implementation specifics. You mentioned a 90-day core implementation timeline. That seems ambitious for an operation of our scale. For the next hour, we delved into detailed discussion of technical requirements, data migration protocols, advisor training methodologies, and client communication strategies. The conversation became increasingly substantive, with Lawrence and Elena engaging in detailed technical exchanges, while Marcus asked insightful questions about business process integration. Throughout this discussion, I noticed my father watching, me more than the presentation, assessing my leadership, my technical knowledge, my business acumen. I maintained composed professionalism while demonstrating comprehensive command of both the technology and its business implications. As the scheduled 2-hour meeting approached its conclusion, my father straightened slightly, signaling a shift to closing matters. This has been informative. Before we conclude, what would be the next steps should we decide to explore this partnership further? The question wasn't commitment, but indicated genuine interest. Exactly the outcome I had hoped for. We would propose a comprehensive systems assessment to develop a detailed implementation plan specific to Cartwright's environment. This would include technical architecture review, client portfolio analysis, and advisor workflow mapping. The assessment typically takes 3 weeks and provides both organizations with the specific information needed to make a final decision. And the cost of this assessment? Lawrence asked. For an organization of Cartwright's scale, $75,000, I replied without hesitation. However, should you proceed with implementation, that amount would be credited toward the overall engagement. David made a sound of disbelief. $75,000 just to tell us if you can actually deliver what you're promising? I met his gaze steadily. The assessment delivers significant value regardless of whether you ultimately choose Prism as your platform. You'll receive a comprehensive analysis of your current technology infrastructure, identification of operational inefficiencies, and detailed recommendations for modernization, all of which would benefit Cartwright, even if implemented with a different solution. My father nodded slightly, acknowledging the reasonableness of this approach. We'll need to discuss internally before making that commitment. Of course. We can provide the assessment agreement for your review, with no obligation until you're ready to proceed. I closed my presentation folder with deliberate care. Thank you all for your time and consideration today. We believe the potential synergies between Cartwright's established client relationships and Prism's technological capabilities could create exceptional value for both organizations. As the meeting concluded and hands were shaken, Marcus approached me while the others gathered their materials. "This went well," he said quietly. "Better than I expected, honestly." "Your father is harder to read than most venture capitalists," I replied with a small smile. "He's impressed, even if he'd never show it. I've worked with him long enough to recognize the signs." Marcus glanced toward our father, who was engaged in conversation with Lawrence. "The next step will be convincing the board that this represents a better path than the Henderson option. When will that decision be made?" "Executive Committee meets next Tuesday, full board the following week." He lowered his voice further. "I'll make the case for proceeding with the assessment, but it would help to have the agreement tomorrow. The more professional and prepared we appear, the stronger the case." I nodded my understanding. "You'll have it by noon." As we prepared to leave, my father approached, having concluded his conversation with Lawrence. "Julia, do you have a moment?" Marcus tactfully moved away, joining Elena and Raj in discussion near the door. David had already left, apparently finding something more urgent than family business to attend to. "Of course," I replied, turning to face my father fully. "The presentation was thorough," he acknowledged. "Your platform has clearly evolved, significantly since your initial concept years ago." The understated praise represented more recognition than he had offered in 5 years. "Thank you. We've refined it through practical implementation across multiple client environments." He nodded, his expression thoughtful. The wealth management landscape is indeed changing, perhaps more rapidly than I anticipated. The admission, however oblique, was remarkable coming from him. Change creates both challenge and opportunity. The firms that adapt deliberately tend to thrive through transitions. Indeed. He hesitated, then added, regardless of our ultimate decision, about this particular partnership, I want you to know that your accomplishments with Prism are significant. Building something of that caliber from concept to implementation is no small achievement. The words caught me off guard. Personal acknowledgement breaking through the professional facade we had both maintained throughout the meeting. That means a lot coming from you, Dad. For a brief moment, his expression softened. Perhaps we could discuss this further. Dinner next week? Just the two of us? The invitation represented far more than a business follow-up. It was a personal opening, a tentative step toward bridging the divide that had separated us for 5 years. I'd like that. As I watched him walk away to join the others, I felt something shift inside me. The rigid boundary between my Cartwright identity and my Prism identity becoming slightly more permeable. Whether this potential partnership materialized or not, something fundamental had changed today. My father had finally seen me not just as his rebellious daughter, but as a business leader worthy of professional respect. The children's table, with its intended slight, had inadvertently created the catalyst for this moment of recognition. The irony wasn't lost on me as I gathered my materials and prepared to return to Prism's offices. Sometimes being relegated to the margins creates the perspective needed to transform the center. The following Tuesday arrived with a sense of suspended possibility. After sending the assessment agreement to Marcus on Friday as promised, I had received only a brief confirmation of receipt. The weekend passed without further communication from any member of the Cartwright camp. Not unusual in business negotiations, but laden with personal significance given my father's dinner invitation. Elena had cautioned me against reading too much into the temporary silence. Executive committees move at their own pace, especially in traditional firms. They'll discuss the Henderson option alongside ours, review financial projections, consider various timelines. Patience is strategic right now. Her advice was sound from a business perspective, but did little to quell the complex emotions stirred by last Thursday's meeting. After 5 years of professional estrangement, I had glimpsed a potential path toward reconciliation with my father. The measured acknowledgement of my accomplishments, significant coming from a man who dispensed praise with miserly reluctance, had reopened channels of connection I had carefully sealed to protect myself from continued disappointment. I maintained focus on Prism's operations throughout Monday and Tuesday morning, reviewing our quarterly forecasts and approving the launch timeline for our next platform enhancement. Externally, I projected the steady leadership my team expected. Internally, I found myself checking my phone more frequently than usual, anticipating word from Marcus about the executive committee's decision. The call finally came Tuesday afternoon as I was reviewing candidate profiles for our expanding data science team. Julia Morgan, I answered, maintaining my professional greeting despite recognizing my brother's number. Julia. Marcus's voice carried a note of restraint that immediately triggered my concern. Do you have a moment to talk privately? I signaled to Rachel through the glass wall of my office to hold my calls, then replied, I do. What's happening? The executive committee met this morning to discuss strategic options. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. There were complications. Meaning? Richard Henderson made an unexpected appearance with a revised proposal. They're offering significantly better terms than initially discussed, plus accelerated timeline for integration. A chill ran through me. Henderson's sudden improved offer couldn't be coincidental. It was a direct response to our presentation last week. Did Dad tell him about our discussions? Not Dad. Marcus clarified, his frustration evident even through the phone. David. Apparently, he called Henderson directly after our meeting, positioned himself as concerned about Cartwright's direction, and suggested their offer needed strengthening to prevent a family alliance with Prism. The betrayal was stunning, yet somehow unsurprising. David's hostility during the meeting had been obvious, but I hadn't anticipated such deliberate sabotage. That's remarkably short-sighted, even for David. It's worse than short-sighted. It's deliberately undermining Cartwright's negotiating position for personal reasons. Marcus's voice dropped lower. He's always been threatened by your success, but this crosses professional boundaries. How did Dad react? I asked, focusing on the most crucial element. A heavy sigh. That's the complicated part. He's furious with David for the unauthorized communication. But Henderson's offer is objectively impressive. 30% premium on valuation, guaranteed retention of the Cartwright name for at least 5 years, leadership positions for key executives including David. The strategic inclusion of David was particularly calculating, appealing to my father's desire to secure his son's future while simultaneously neutralizing a potential opponent of the deal. Henderson was demonstrating exactly why he had survived decades in wealth management. He understood that acquisition decisions were as much about psychology as economics. What was the committee's decision? I kept my voice steady, professional. They've authorized proceeding with both paths simultaneously. Formal due diligence with Henderson and the assessment with Prism. Dad positioned it as prudent evaluation of all options, but practically speaking, Henderson now has momentum. I processed this unwelcome development, considering our strategic response. Is the assessment agreement still being presented to the board next week? Yes. Dad insisted on that despite pressure to focus exclusively on Henderson. Marcus paused. There's something else you should know. Dad and Henderson have scheduled dinner tonight. Ostensibly a casual social engagement, but actually the beginning of serious negotiations, I finished for him. Thank you for telling me, Marcus. I appreciate your transparency. We're still family, he replied, echoing his earlier sentiment. And I still believe a Prism partnership represents a better long-term strategy for Cartwright. Henderson's offer solves immediate challenges but surrenders our independence permanently. After ending the call, I sat motionless, absorbing the implications. Henderson's aggressive countermove threatened not just the potential business partnership, but the fragile personal reconciliation that had begun to take shape. My father's dinner invitation now hung in uncertainty. Would he still want that conversation? If Cartwright was accelerating toward Henderson instead? Rather than dwelling on factors beyond my control, I channeled my energy into strategic response. I summoned Elena and our executive team for an urgent meeting, outlining the situation, without revealing the family complications behind it. Henderson's made an aggressive move, I concluded. If we want this partnership, we need to demonstrate unique value beyond what an acquisition could provide. Sam, our revenue officer, leaned forward. We could accelerate the assessment timeline. Offer to begin immediately, deliver preliminary findings before the board meeting. Potentially, I nodded, but rushing might suggest desperation. We need to enhance our value proposition without appearing reactive. Elena tapped her stylus against her tablet thoughtfully. What about the client retention algorithm we've been developing? It's not fully productized yet, but the core functionality is solid. For a firm like Cartwright considering acquisition, client retention projections would be extremely valuable. The suggestion had merit. Our data science team had spent the past 6 months developing a predictive model that assessed client retention likelihood through major transitions. Initially conceived for advisor retirement planning, it could be adapted to evaluate acquisition scenarios. How quickly could we prepare a preliminary demonstration? I asked. 3 days for a credible preview, Elena replied after brief consideration. We'd need to calibrate it with some of Cartwright's actual client demographic data, But even with anonymized profiles, we could generate meaningful projections. Perfect. Develop a proposal specifically focused on transition risk assessment, something valuable regardless of which path they ultimately choose. I turned to our communications director. Sarah, prepare messaging that positions this as a standard component of our assessment process, not a reaction to competitive pressure. As the team dispersed to execute this strategy, I faced the more personal question: how to address the dinner invitation with my father. After careful consideration, I decided direct communication was the only appropriate approach. Rather than calling, which might put him on the spot during a busy day, I sent a carefully worded text. I understand the executive committee has authorized proceeding with both strategic options. I look forward to discussing this further during our dinner. Does Thursday still work for your schedule? His response came several hours later, just as I was concluding a client call. Thursday confirmed. 7:30 at Marcel's. We have much to discuss. The brevity was characteristic, but the confirmation itself significant. Despite Henderson's aggressive countermove and the complicated family dynamics involved, my father still wanted our private conversation. Whether motivated by business strategy, personal reconciliation, or some combination of both remained to be seen. Thursday evening arrived with unseasonable warmth, the October air carrying a hint of lingering summer. Marcel's occupied the ground, floor of a restored Victorian in the city's historic district, its understated elegance and exceptional privacy making it a favorite among business executives and political figures. As the maitre d' led me to a secluded corner table, I spotted my father already seated, reviewing what appeared to be financial documents. He rose as I approached, his greeting warmer than our last interaction, though still marked by the reserve that characterized our relationship. Julia, thank you for coming. Thank you for the invitation, I replied, taking the seat opposite him. It's been a while since we've had dinner, just the two of us. 5 years and 4 months, to be precise. Our last private meal occurring, just before I declined the Cartwright position and launched Prism. That evening had ended with strained civility masking profound disappointment. Tonight felt weighted with similar significance, though the underlying dynamics had shifted dramatically. After ordering drinks, scotch for him, gin and tonic for me, my father set aside his documents and regarded me with uncharacteristic directness. I imagine Marcus has kept you informed about recent developments. He mentioned Henderson's revised offer and the executive committee's decision to explore both options, I acknowledged, matching his straightforward approach. A prudent strategy, evaluating all possibilities before making such a significant decision. A flicker of appreciation crossed his features at my professional framing. Indeed, though circumstances have become more complicated than anticipated. Because of David's unauthorized communication with Henderson? I kept my tone neutral, avoiding accusation. My father's expression tightened momentarily. David's actions were inappropriate and have been addressed, but the situation extends beyond that particular misstep. He paused as our drinks arrived, taking a measured sip before continuing. Richard Henderson and I have known each other for 30 years, competitors, occasionally collaborators, fundamentally respectful of each other's operations. Until now, I observed quietly. Until now, he agreed with surprising candor. His current approach is uncharacteristically aggressive. The timing of his revised offer, its specific structure targeting key concerns and individuals within our organization, it suggests he has more internal information than he should. You think David shared details beyond the fact of our discussions? I think Richard has cultivated multiple sources within Cartwright over the past year. My father's gaze was sharp, assessing, which raises the question of why he suddenly feels such urgency to accelerate acquisition discussions that have been proceeding at a measured pace for months. The implication was clear. You think he's concerned about the Prism partnership? I think he recognizes a legitimate threat to his strategic objectives. My father leaned back slightly as our server arrived to take our dinner orders. Once, we were alone again, he continued with remarkable frankness. Henderson's growth strategy requires acquiring established wealth management firms with aging client bases and outdated technology, precisely the profile Cartwright currently presents. The admission of Cartwright's technological limitations, from a man who had consistently defended traditional approaches, was striking. And a partnership with Prism would fundamentally change that profile. Precisely. A technologically enhanced Cartwright with modernized client engagement capabilities would no longer be an attractive acquisition target. We'd become a formidable competitor instead. He took another sip of his scotch, his expression thoughtful, which explains both the timing and generosity of Henderson's revised offer. He's attempting to secure acquisition before we can implement transformative changes. The analysis was impressively clear-eyed, suggesting my father understood the competitive dynamics far better than his previous resistance to technological evolution had indicated. That's a compelling interpretation. May I ask what you communicated during your dinner with Richard Tuesday evening? A raised eyebrow acknowledged my awareness of that meeting. I expressed appreciation for his revised offer while emphasizing our commitment to thorough evaluation of all strategic options. I also mentioned that technological modernization remains our priority regardless of which path we ultimately choose. Maintaining negotiating leverage, I noted with professional appreciation. A fundamental principle in any significant transaction. He paused, studying me with a directness that felt both professional and paternal. Which brings me to the purpose of our dinner tonight. I need to understand your genuine objectives regarding Cartwright. The question cut to the heart of the complex intertwining of business strategy and family dynamics that characterized our situation. I considered my response carefully, recognizing its importance to both the potential partnership and our personal relationship. My professional objective is creating a partnership that delivers significant value to both organizations. Cartwright's established client relationships and wealth management expertise combined with Prism's technological capabilities would create a genuinely differentiated offering in the market. I met his gaze directly. My personal hope is that such a partnership might also help heal the rift that's existed between us since I chose a different path 5 years ago. For a long moment, my father was silent, weighing my words with the careful consideration he typically reserved for major investment decisions. When he finally spoke, his voice carried unusual emotional weight beneath its professional tone. I've spent considerable time reflecting on our conversation from 5 years ago, and my reaction to your decision to decline the Cartwright position. He glanced down briefly at his glass before meeting my eyes again. I mistook your different vision for rejection of everything I had built. I took personally what was actually a legitimate professional difference in strategic perspective. The admission, as close to an apology as my father was capable of offering, caught me off guard. Thank you for saying that. It means a great deal to hear. Your success with Prism has been instructive. A hint of rueful acknowledgement colored his expression. The wealth management industry is indeed evolving precisely as you predicted. Traditional firms must adapt or become obsolete, a reality I resisted longer than was prudent. Our meals arrived, temporarily pausing the conversation. When the server departed, I found myself searching for the right response to this unprecedented openness from a man who had always maintained rigid emotional barriers, particularly regarding professional matters. Technology alone isn't sufficient, I finally offered. Prism succeeds because we combine technological innovation with deep understanding of wealth management fundamentals, principles I learned from watching you build Cartwright. Each approach has its strengths. He nodded, accepting this olive branch with subtle appreciation. Which brings us to the potential partnership. The executive committee has authorized proceeding with the assessment, but the board remains divided. Some members, particularly those closest to retirement, favor the certainty of Henderson's offer over the potential disruption of technological transformation. That's understandable, I acknowledged. Change involves risk, and Henderson's offer provides immediate, quantifiable value. True, but it also surrenders independence permanently. He cut his steak with precise movements that reflected his methodical approach to all things. 5 years of maintained branding means little when measured against 75 years of Cartwright legacy. The sentiment revealed more about his thinking than any direct statement about the competing options. Despite his newfound acknowledgement of technological necessity, my father remained fundamentally committed to preserving the independent Cartwright name. Our assessment would include a comparative analysis, I noted, projecting client retention and revenue impacts for both scenarios, partnership versus acquisition. Data that would help quantify the long-term value of independence versus immediate acquisition premium. Interest flickered in his eyes. That would be particularly valuable for the board presentation. Many members respond more readily to quantitative projections than qualitative arguments about legacy preservation. We've developed proprietary models specifically for this purpose. Elena mentioned this to Marcus yesterday. We could incorporate this analysis within the standard assessment timeline. My father nodded, considering. That would strengthen the case significantly, particularly if the projections demonstrate superior long-term value compared to Henderson's immediate premium. And if they don't? I challenged gently. What if the data suggests the acquisition offer represents better shareholder value? The question was deliberately provocative, testing whether my father was seeking genuine analysis or merely supporting documentation for his preferred outcome. His response would reveal much about both his business integrity and our potential for authentic reconciliation. He considered this carefully before answering. Then we would need to evaluate whether factors beyond immediate financial return, client relationships, company culture, legacy preservation, justify choosing the partnership path despite lower projected returns. A balanced assessment, I acknowledged, respecting his thoughtful approach. Which brings me to a related question. He set down his utensils, giving me his full attention. In a potential partnership scenario, what role would you envision for yourself regarding Cartwright? The question was inevitable, yet challenging. Any answer risked appearing either presumptuous or uncommitted. That would depend on the specific integration model we developed. Some options would involve minimal direct involvement from me, with Prism providing technology and implementation support while Cartwright maintains independent operations. Others might benefit from closer strategic alignment. And your preference? He pressed, not satisfied with my diplomatic response. Transparency seems appropriate here, I acknowledged. I would welcome the opportunity for more direct involvement with Cartwright, not displacing current leadership, but contributing technological expertise and innovation perspective to strategic planning. However, that involvement would need to be based on demonstrated value, not family connection. My father nodded slowly. A reasonable position. He hesitated, then added with uncharacteristic candor. Your mother has pointed out, quite persistently, that excluding you from Cartwright's future would repeat the very mistake I made 5 years ago, rejecting valuable perspective because it challenged established thinking. The mention of my mother's advocacy surprised me. She had always maintained careful neutrality in business disagreements between my father and me, at least publicly. I appreciate her support, but any role would need to make business sense, not just family sense. Agreed. He regarded me thoughtfully. Though I'm beginning to recognize that separating business and family completely is neither possible nor desirable in our situation. The strength of family enterprises comes partly from the alignment of personal commitment and professional objectives. This philosophical shift, from rigid separation of family and business to acknowledgement of their constructive integration, represented perhaps the most significant evolution in my father's thinking. For decades, he had maintained that business decisions must remain untainted by family considerations, despite simultaneously expecting family loyalty to the company. That alignment requires mutual respect, I noted. Recognition that different perspectives can serve the same fundamental objectives. A lesson I've been slow to learn, he admitted with surprising humility. But recent events have been educational. As we finished our main courses, the conversation shifted to specific next steps: the assessment process, board presentation, preparation, and communication strategy. My father revealed that the board meeting had been moved up to accommodate travel schedules, now scheduled for Tuesday rather than Thursday of the following week. An accelerated timeline, I observed. We'll ensure the assessment delivers preliminary findings by Monday to support your presentation. I would appreciate that. He hesitated, then added, I'd also like you to attend the board meeting, not for the entire session, but specifically for the technology strategy discussion. The invitation represented a significant shift from his previous approach of maintaining strict separation between Prism and Cartwright governance. To present the assessment findings? That, and to address questions about the partnership potential directly. Several board members have expressed interest in hearing your perspective firsthand. He paused, adding with subtle significance, including some who remember when you used to visit the office as a child. I understood the implication. The board included several of my father's contemporaries who had known me since childhood. People for whom the personal and professional dimensions of this potential partnership were inextricably linked. My presence would acknowledge both aspects of the decision they faced. I'd be happy to participate, I agreed, though we should be transparent that I'm there in a dual capacity, as Prism's CEO and as a Cartwright. Precisely. He signaled for the check, then fixed me with a direct look. One final matter we should address. David. I maintained a neutral expression, despite the internal tension the name evoked. What about him? His unauthorized communication with Henderson was inappropriate and potentially damaging to Cartwright's negotiating position. My father's tone carried unusual sternness. However, his concerns about a potential partnership with Prism, specifically regarding leadership dynamics, aren't entirely without merit. I raised an eyebrow, waiting for elaboration. David perceives any alliance with your company as threatenings to his position and future prospects at Cartwright. This perception, while emotionally driven, creates a practical challenge for implementing any partnership successfully. The observation was accurate if diplomatically phrased. David's hostility wasn't merely sibling rivalry. It represented a genuine organizational resistance point that would need addressing in any implementation plan. You're suggesting we need a strategy that addresses his concerns explicitly, I translated. I'm suggesting that family reconciliation must include all family members if it's to succeed long-term. My father held my gaze steadily. However, justified your frustration with David's behavior might be. The challenge was clear. My father was testing whether my commitment to healing family rifts extended beyond our direct relationship to include my more problematic brother. His use of reconciliation rather than partnership emphasized that he now viewed the business and family dimensions as interrelated rather than separate. A comprehensive approach makes sense, I acknowledged, choosing my words carefully. Any implementation plan would need to clarify roles and responsibilities across both organizations, addressing concerns about displacement or marginalization. Good. He nodded with apparent satisfaction at my professional framing. I've scheduled a family dinner Sunday evening. I'd like you to attend, a chance to reset expectations and relationships before Tuesday's board meeting. The prospect of confronting David so soon after his deliberate sabotage was unwelcome, but strategically necessary. I'll be there. We left the restaurant and waited for our respective cars. My father surprised me with an unexpected question. Do you remember when you were about 10 and you rewired the lighting in your dollhouse because you thought the original design was inefficient? The memory surfaced immediately, my childhood obsession with improving systems, even in toys. You helped me calculate the proper voltage for the miniature circuitry. He nodded, a rare smile softening his features. You were determined to create the perfect solution even then. Wouldn't accept the existing limitations just because that's how dollhouses were typically designed. I was rather stubborn, I acknowledged, wondering where this reminiscence was leading. You were innovative, he corrected, his expression turning thoughtful. I encouraged that quality then, but somehow failed to recognize its value when applied to the family business. The valet arrived with his car, momentarily interrupting his reflection. As he prepared to leave, he added with uncharacteristic gentleness, "Perhaps we're both getting a second chance to get it right." As I watched his car disappear into the evening traffic, I felt a complex mixture of hope and caution. The dinner had revealed a different side of my father, more reflective, more willing to acknowledge past misjudgments, more open to integration of family and business than I had ever experienced. Yet the path forward remained fraught with challenges. David's active resistance, the Henderson alternative, board members with varying priorities. Sunday's family dinner loomed as the next critical juncture, a private precursor to Tuesday's formal board presentation. If we couldn't navigate the family dynamics successfully, the business partnership would remain a theoretical possibility rather than an implementable reality. The 3 days between my dinner with my father and Sunday's family gathering unfolded in a whirlwind of strategic preparation and emotional anticipation. At Prism, our team worked relentlessly to develop the assessment framework and preliminary client retention model for Cartwright, with Elena sleeping on the office couch for 2 consecutive nights to meet our accelerated timeline. By Saturday afternoon, we had produced a compelling analysis that compared projected outcomes for both scenarios, partnership with Prism versus acquisition by Henderson, with data visualizations that made the long-term advantages of technological transformation unmistakably clear. The retention projections are particularly powerful, Elena observed during our Saturday review session. The Henderson acquisition shows a 24% client attrition rate over the first 3 years, compared to just 9% with our platform implementation. That represents nearly $800 million in preserved assets under management. I studied the projection graphs with cautious optimism. Do we have sufficient validation data to defend these numbers if challenged? The board will certainly question any analysis that so clearly favors our option. We've based the projections on actual results from 8 comparable wealth management transitions, applying conservative adjustment factors for Cartwright's specific client demographics. Elena pulled up the supporting documentation. The methodology is transparent and defensible, even under skeptical examination. Good. We'll need that robustness for Tuesday's presentation. I closed the assessment document, satisfied with our progress. Let's have the final design team polish the visuals tomorrow morning. I want this to be absolutely flawless before we send it to Marcus Monday morning. Throughout these intense work sessions, my thoughts repeatedly drifted to Sunday's family dinner. The professional path forward was becoming increasingly clear. Our assessment provided compelling evidence for the partnership approach. The personal dynamics, however, remained treacherously complex, particularly regarding David's entrenched hostility and my father's expectation of family-wide reconciliation. Sunday evening arrived with unseasonable fog shrouding the city, the misty atmosphere creating an appropriate backdrop for the uncertain family gathering ahead. I arrived at my parents' home precisely on time, having deliberately chosen an outfit that balanced professional confidence with familial warmth. A cashmere sweater and tailored trousers in complementary shades of deep burgundy, accessorized with the pearl necklace my mother had given me for my college graduation. My mother answered the door herself, bypassing the formality of having their housekeeper greet guests for family occasions. At 64, Diane Cartwright remained elegantly poised, her silver-streaked dark hair styled in a classic bob that framed features still striking despite subtle signs of aging. Her expression, typically maintained within a narrow range of socially appropriate responses, revealed unusual emotion as she embraced me. "Julia, it's wonderful to have you here." The genuine warmth in her voice suggested my father had shared details of our Thursday dinner and the potential family reconciliation it represented. "It's good to be here, Mom." I returned her embrace, recognizing how the professional rift with my father had inevitably created personal distance from both parents despite my efforts to maintain separate relationships. She drew back, studying me with motherly assessment. "You look well. Success agrees with you." "Thank you." I followed her into the house, immediately enveloped by the familiar scents and sounds of my childhood home, the subtle fragrance of her signature orchid arrangements, the faint strains of classical music from the hidden speakers my father had meticulously installed throughout the house, the gentle tick of the grandfather clock that had occupied the front hall for 3 generations. "Your father and Marcus are in the study," she informed me as we moved through the foyer. "David and Rebecca should arrive shortly." The mention of David's wife added a previously unconsidered dimension to the evening's dynamics. Rebecca Cartwright, a corporate attorney specializing in mergers and acquisitions, had always maintained a carefully neutral position in family business matters, though her professional expertise undoubtedly influenced David's perspectives. My father and Marcus rose as we entered the study, their conversation pausing mid-sentence. My father greeted me with the same increased warmth he had displayed during our dinner, while Marcus offered a subtle nod of solidarity. "Julia," my father acknowledged, gesturing toward the informal seating area rather than his desk. "We were just discussing the assessment framework. Marcus mentioned Elena has developed some compelling projections." "The preliminary findings are quite revealing," I confirmed, accepting the glass of wine my mother offered from a tray already prepared on the side table. "We focused particularly on client retention metrics across different transition scenarios." Marcus leaned forward with interest. "Any highlights you can share before tomorrow's formal delivery?" "The differential impact on client retention is substantial," I replied, conscious of maintaining appropriate confidentiality, while acknowledging Marcus's role as internal advocate. "The data strongly suggests that technological enhancement preserves client relationships more effectively than ownership transition, even when the acquiring firm has strong brand recognition." My father nodded thoughtfully. "That aligns with my observations throughout the industry. Clients often react negatively to perceived instability, regardless of the acquiring firm's reputation." Our professional discussion was interrupted by the arrival of David and Rebecca, their voices carrying from the foyer as my mother went to greet them. The subtle shift in the room's atmosphere was immediate, my father straightening almost imperceptibly, Marcus glancing toward me with cautionary awareness. David entered the study with the conflicted energy that had characterized him since childhood, simultaneously seeking approval and projecting defensive independence. At 33, he maintained the athletic physique that had made him a college rowing star, though his frequent cycling between career paths had prevented him from achieving the executive presence that distinguished our father and Marcus. Rebecca followed a step behind, her expression professionally neutral despite the charged family dynamics she was undoubtedly assessing. "Sorry we're late," David offered without particular sincerity. "Traffic was terrible downtown." His gaze landed on me with poorly concealed hostility. "Julia, didn't expect to see you here." "Family dinner," I replied evenly, raising my wine glass in subtle greeting. "Good to see you, Rebecca." Rebecca nodded graciously, moving to exchange proper greetings with my father and Marcus while maintaining distance from the siblings' tension. "Robert, the Henderson acquisition closed yesterday. Congratulations! The terms were quite favorable according to my colleagues who reviewed the documentation. My father accepted the professional acknowledgement with a pleased nod. Your guidance on the tax structure was particularly valuable. We should discuss the integration timeline when you have a moment. The deliberate shift to uncontroversial business matters temporarily eased the tension, allowing everyone to settle into the practiced social rhythms that had always governed Cartwright family gatherings. My mother announced dinner would be served in 15 minutes, initiating the familiar pre-meal ritual of carefully bounded conversation over drinks. David positioned himself near the bar cabinet, deliberately separate from where Marcus and I stood near the fireplace. Henderson called me yesterday, he announced with calculated casualness. They've restructured their organization chart for the post-acquisition integration. Very favorable positioning for Cartwright leadership. The provocative statement hung in the air for a moment before my father responded with measured professionalism. Richard is certainly eager to present his offer in the most compelling light. We'll evaluate all aspects of both options before the board makes any decision. Both options, David repeated, emphasizing the plural with subtle mockery. Right. The family alliance versus the proven industry leader. He glanced toward me with poorly disguised resentment. Quite the coincidence that Julia suddenly wants to reunite with the family business now that Prism needs established clients for their technology experiments. The deliberate mischaracterization demanded response, but Marcus intervened before I could speak. That's neither accurate nor helpful, David. The potential partnership offers specific strategic advantages that directly address challenges we've been discussing in executive committee for over a year. The timing reflects market evolution rather than opportunism. David's expression hardened at this defense from our older brother. Always the diplomat, Marcus. But we all know what's happening here. Dad's reconsidering his position on Julia's departure because her company has technology we need. It's business being dressed up as family reconciliation. That's enough. My father's voice carried the quiet authority that had always commanded immediate attention in both boardroom and family discussions. This dinner was arranged specifically to address these tensions directly, rather than allowing them to undermine important business decisions. Let's move this conversation to the dining room where we can discuss matters properly. My mother appeared, at the study doorway as if on cue, her perfect hostess smile masking any reaction to the obvious tension. Dinner is served. I've had Marjorie prepare David's favorite roast duck. The Cartwright dining room embodied generations of family tradition. From the Chippendale table that had witnessed business deals and birthday celebrations for 70 years, to the oil paintings of New England coastal scenes collected by my great-grandfather. As we took our customary seats, my father at the head, my mother at the foot, siblings and spouses along the sides, the physical positioning reinforced family hierarchy in ways both subtle and profound. Once the first course was served and Marjorie had withdrawn to the kitchen, my father set his napkin deliberately beside his plate and addressed the underlying tensions directly. I've asked Julia to join us tonight because Cartwright Financial stands at a critical decision point. The choice between Henderson's acquisition offer and a technological partnership with Prism will determine not just our business future, but our family legacy. David set down his fork with barely controlled frustration. This framing already presumes both options are equally valid. Henderson represents certainty, established market presence, guaranteed valuation, clear transition path. Prism is an experiment with family complications. All business decisions involve weighing certainty against potential, my father countered with unexpected patience. Henderson's offer provides immediate, quantifiable value, but surrenders independence permanently. A partnership with Prism preserves the Cartwright name while addressing our technological limitations. Rebecca, who had remained characteristically observant during the opening exchanges, interjected with professional precision. From a purely structural perspective, acquisition and partnership represent fundamentally different risk profiles. One eliminates independent decision-making authority in exchange for defined value, while the other maintains autonomy but requires successful implementation to realize projected benefits. Exactly, Marcus agreed. And that's precisely what the board needs to evaluate on Tuesday, whether preserved independence justifies the implementation risk and potentially longer timeline for value realization. David shook his head dismissively. You're all dancing around the real issue. This isn't just about business models. It's about family dynamics. Julia left Cartwright to prove her point about technology. Now that she's proven it, she wants back in. But on her terms, with her company, without having paid the dues the rest of us have. The accusation hung in the air, directly articulating the resentment that had simmered beneath his professional objections. My father looked toward me, his expression suggesting this was the moment to address David's challenge directly rather than deflecting to business considerations. You're right that this involves both business and family considerations, I acknowledged, meeting David's hostile gaze steadily. But you're wrong about my motivations. I didn't leave Cartwright to prove a point. I left because I saw an opportunity that couldn't be pursued within the existing structure. The potential partnership isn't about returning triumphantly. It's about creating mutual value through complementary strengths. Convenient interpretation, David scoffed. Meanwhile, those of us who stayed loyal to the family business are expected to welcome you back as some kind of technological savior. No one is suggesting that, my father interjected firmly. Any partnership would involve clearly defined roles and responsibilities based on organizational needs, not family positioning. My mother, who had remained characteristically silent during business discussions, surprised everyone by addressing David directly. Your father and I have always tried to recognize each of your unique strengths. Marcus has extraordinary people skills and financial acumen. Julia has remarkable technological vision and implementation abilities. You have creative thinking and relationship-building talents. David's expression darkened at what he perceived as faint praise. Translated, Marcus gets the financial leadership, Julia gets the technology leadership, and I get whatever scraps remain. That's not what your mother said, my father responded with visible effort to maintain patience. But leadership positions in any organization must be earned through demonstrated capability, not family entitlement. Like Julia demonstrated her capability by walking away when she didn't get her way, David countered. Now she's miraculously qualified to determine our technological future because she built a startup with Arthur Chen's money and connections? I maintained composure despite the deliberate provocations, recognizing that responding defensively would only reinforce his narrative. Prism has succeeded because it addresses genuine market needs with effective solutions. Our client results speak for themselves. Whether that qualifies me for any role at Cartwright is entirely separate from whether our technology offers value to the organization. Marcus nodded agreement. The assessment we're conducting evaluates the platform's capabilities and potential integration challenges objectively. Personal histories and family dynamics are irrelevant to that technical evaluation, but not irrelevant to implementation success, Rebecca observed with lawyer-like precision. Organizational change requires alignment of leadership vision and execution capability. Family tensions could potentially undermine even the most promising technological solution. Her astute observation shifted the conversation toward practical considerations rather than historical grievances. My father seized this opening to address implementation directly. Any partnership would require clear governance structures and decision frameworks, he acknowledged, including specific role definitions that leverage each person's strengths while minimizing potential conflicts. And what exactly would those roles be? David demanded. Where does the director of strategic initiatives fit when his sister's company is suddenly determining strategy? The directness of the question created a moment of uncomfortable silence. Everyone recognized this as the heart of David's resistance. fear of displacement and diminished relevance within the family. Business hierarchy? That's a legitimate question that would need thoughtful consideration, I acknowledged, choosing my words carefully. A successful partnership would maintain clear organizational boundaries while enabling strategic alignment. Prism would provide technological infrastructure and implementation support, while Cartwright would maintain client relationships and portfolio management autonomy. That sounds appropriately structured from a corporate governance perspective, my father observed, but it doesn't directly address leadership roles within each organization. I recognized the opening he was providing to address David's concerns more specifically. My role would primarily remain leading Prism's overall strategy and growth, not inserting myself into Cartwright's management structure. Any advisory input would be clearly defined and focused on technological implementation rather than general business strategy. David's expression remained skeptical. And you expect us to believe you wouldn't leverage this partnership to gradually increase your influence over Cartwright operations? After you've made it abundantly clear you think our approaches are outdated? I expect any arrangement would include explicit governance boundaries and decision authorities, I replied. Evenly. Professional relationships thrive on clear parameters, regardless of family connections. Rebecca, who had been observing the exchange with analytical precision, directed an unexpected question to my father. Robert, you've been steering this conversation toward rational business considerations, but David's concerns are fundamentally emotional. What assurances can you offer him that his position within Cartwright won't be undermined by this potential partnership? The directness of her inquiry seemed to catch my father slightly off guard. He considered his response thoughtfully before answering. David's role has always been valued for his relationship-building capabilities and creative thinking. Those qualities would become more important, not less, during any significant organizational transition. Vague platitudes, David muttered, clearly unsatisfied. My father's expression hardened slightly at this dismissal. Not platitudes, strategic reality. Major transitions require maintaining client confidence through consistent relationship management. Your connections with the younger generation of client families would be particularly crucial during technological implementation. This specific acknowledgement of David's actual strengths, his rapport with clients our own age, who stood to inherit significant wealth from Cartwright's aging primary client base, represented my father's most direct effort to address his insecurities constructively. Marcus reinforced this direction. The assessment analysis shows that client retention during major transitions correlates strongly with perceived continuity of relationship management. Technology changes are accepted more readily when delivered through trusted human connections. For the first time, David appeared to consider the possibility that a technological partnership might actually enhance rather than diminish his role. The younger Hammond heirs have been pushing for more digital integration, he admitted reluctantly. Edward specifically mentioned their frustration with our quarterly report formats compared to their other investment platforms. Exactly. I nodded, seizing this opening. The Prism platform includes customizable client interfaces that maintain your personal relationship while delivering information in formats that meet evolving expectations. The human connection remains primary, simply enhanced through improved tools. My mother, sensing the slight shift in David's resistance, skillfully directed the conversation toward specific implementation examples rather than abstract governance concerns. Julia, perhaps you could explain how other wealth management firms have handled these transitions while maintaining their client relationship managers' positions. The deliberate redirection allowed me to share several concrete case studies where relationship managers had actually strengthened their client connections through technological enhancement, gradually moving the discussion from theoretical threats to practical opportunities. As dessert was served, my mother's famous crème brûlée with seasonal berries, the conversation had evolved from hostile confrontation to cautious consideration of implementation specifics. David remained skeptical, but had shifted from categorical rejection to conditional questions about how particular aspects would function, a significant evolution in his positioning. Rebecca, observing this transition with her attorney's eye for negotiation dynamics, offered a constructive suggestion. It might be useful to develop a formal transition governance structure, she proposed. A clearly defined implementation committee with representatives from both organizations, operating under explicit decision authorities and conflict resolution protocols. That's actually part of our standard implementation methodology, I confirmed. We've found that formal governance structures significantly improve transition success by addressing exactly the concerns David has raised about role ambiguity and decision authority. My father nodded with approval at this practical approach. We should include that governance framework in Tuesday's board presentation. Many directors will have similar questions about maintaining appropriate boundaries while enabling effective integration. As the dinner concluded and we moved to the living room for coffee, the atmospheric shift was palpable. The hostile confrontation David had initiated had evolved into cautious professional discussion of implementation challenges. Not full acceptance, certainly, but progression from categorical rejection to conditional consideration. My father used this improved dynamic to address next steps directly. The board presentation Tuesday will be critical. They'll evaluate both the Henderson acquisition and Prism partnership options based on quantitative projections and implementation feasibility. Julia will present the assessment findings directly, followed by Marcus outlining the implementation approach. David tensed visibly at this arrangement. And my role? You'll address client relationship implications, my father replied without hesitation. Specifically, how we maintain continuity while enhancing service delivery through technological integration. Your perspective on next-generation client expectations will be particularly valuable. The deliberate inclusion, assigning David a meaningful role rather than sidelining him during the critical presentation, represented my father's most concrete reassurance that the potential partnership wouldn't diminish his position within the family business hierarchy. As the evening drew to a close, Rebecca approached me directly while David was engaged in conversation with Marcus about specific client examples for the presentation. He's more insecure than hostile, she observed quietly. The professional assessment delivered with unexpected personal candor. David has always measured himself against your father's expectations and found himself lacking. Your success with Prism has only intensified that insecurity. I understand that dynamic better than you might think, I acknowledged. We've all operated within the shadow of the Cartwright legacy, just responding to it differently. She nodded thoughtfully. This partnership, if structured properly, could actually help him find his distinctive contribution rather than continuing to measure himself against metrics that don't align with his actual strengths. Her insight suggested she had given considerable thought to her husband's professional identity beyond the immediate business decision. That's a perceptive observation. The right governance structure could create space for different types of contribution rather than enforcing hierarchical comparison. Exactly. She glanced toward David, her expression softening slightly. He's talented in ways that traditional wealth management structures don't adequately recognize or reward. Perhaps this transition could create space for those talents to find more appropriate expression. This unexpected alliance, Rebecca recognizing potential benefits for David beyond the obvious business advantages, suggested possibilities for family reconciliation I hadn't anticipated. As we prepared to depart, I noticed subtle shifts in everyone's positioning. David still maintained emotional distance but had abandoned active hostility. My father exhibited cautious optimism about Tuesday's presentation. My mother displayed quiet satisfaction at the family's tentative steps toward reconciliation. Marcus walked me to my car after final goodbyes had been exchanged. That went better than expected, he observed as we reached the circular driveway, where our vehicles waited. Eventually, I agreed. Though David's initial resistance was exactly as anticipated. His concerns aren't entirely irrational, Marcus noted with characteristic fairness. Any significant change creates winners and losers within organizational structures. His position is arguably most vulnerable during technological transition, which is why the governance framework Rebecca suggested is so important, I acknowledged. Clear roles and decision authorities actually reduce anxiety by eliminating ambiguity. Marcus nodded agreement. I'll incorporate that framework into my section of Tuesday's presentation. The board responds well to structured implementation approaches. As I prepared to leave, Marcus offered a final observation. Whatever happens Tuesday, something important shifted tonight. For the first time in 5 years, we're having actual family discussions about business futures rather than maintaining polite separation between personal and professional identities. His assessment captured the evening's most significant outcome. Beyond specific business strategies or implementation approaches, the Cartwright family had begun reconnecting professional and personal dimensions that had been artificially separated since my departure. Whether this tentative reconciliation would survive Tuesday's board decision remained uncertain, but the possibility had been established in ways that seemed impossible just weeks earlier. Tuesday morning dawned with the crisp clarity that occasionally graces autumn in the financial district, sunlight gleaming against glass towers and casting long shadows across the historic buildings that housed institutions like Cartwright Financial. I arrived at Prism's offices by 6, driven by a mixture of strategic preparation and nervous energy that coffee could neither create nor quell. The day's board presentation represented not just a pivotal business opportunity, but a defining moment in the complex reconciliation of professional ambition and family identity I had navigated since walking away from Cartwright 5 years earlier. Elena was already there, finalizing the assessment materials with our design team. She looked up from a conference room filled with visualization displays, her expression revealing both exhaustion and professional satisfaction. "The final client retention projections are extraordinary," she greeted me, gesturing toward the central monitor. "We've incorporated the additional demographic data Marcus sent over last night, and the differential is even more pronounced than our initial estimates." I studied the refined analysis with cautious optimism. The contrast between scenarios was remarkably stark. The Henderson acquisition showing a projected 31% client attrition over 5 years, compared to only 12% with the Prism platform implementation. Even more significantly, the assets preserved through the partnership approach represented nearly $2 billion in client wealth that would otherwise migrate to competing firms during ownership transition. "These numbers are compelling," I acknowledged. "Have we stress-tested them against worst-case implementation scenarios? The board will certainly question projections this favorable to our proposal." We modeled 3 contingency scenarios with extended implementation timelines and higher resistance factors, Elena confirmed, bringing up supplementary analyses. Even under the most pessimistic assumptions, the partnership approach still outperforms acquisition by minimum 12% on retention metrics. Good. That robustness will be critical today. I moved to the adjacent displays showing implementation timelines and governance structures. Let's review the transition framework one more time. David raised several legitimate concerns about role definition during implementation. For the next hour, we refined and strengthened every element of the presentation, anticipating potential objections and preparing evidence-based responses. By 8, our team had created the most comprehensive and persuasive assessment we had ever produced, a testament to both the strategic importance of this particular engagement and the personal significance it carried for me. "Ready for this?" Elena asked as we gathered the materials for transport to the Cartwright offices. "As ready as possible," I replied, straightening my navy suit jacket with unconscious precision. Though board presentations always contain unpredictable elements, especially when family dynamics are involved, she observed perceptively. Whatever happens today, remember that Prism's success doesn't depend on this single partnership. We're approaching from a position of strength. Her reminder was both professionally appropriate and personally necessary. In the whirlwind of Cartwright reconciliation possibilities, I had maintained conscious awareness that Prism remained independently valuable regardless of this particular outcome. Our company had built remarkable momentum that would continue with or without the Cartwright alliance. The Cartwright financial headquarters occupied the upper floors of a classical revival building that had housed the firm since its founding. A deliberate architectural statement about tradition, permanence, and historical continuity. As Elena and I entered the marble-floored lobby, I experienced the distinct sensation of simultaneously belonging and not belonging, of returning to a foundational element of my identity while remaining fundamentally changed by years of separate experience. Marcus met us at the executive elevator, his expression conveying professional focus tinged with underlying tension. Board members are arriving now. We'll have a few minutes to synchronize our presentations before the formal session begins. Any developments since Sunday? I asked as we ascended to the executive floor. Henderson sent revised term sheets. Yesterday afternoon, they've increased the valuation premium to 35% and extended the Cartwright brand maintenance period to 7 years. His tone remained neutral, though the significance of these improvements was unmistakable. Richard clearly recognizes the partnership option represents genuine competition. The timing suggests he has sources within Cartwright providing updates, Elena observed. Marcus nodded grimly. Dad has significantly restricted information flow about today's meeting, but word inevitably travels in an organization this size. We should expect Henderson to have reasonable awareness of our presentation. Focus. The elevator opened directly into the executive reception area, where my father stood conversing with 2 board members I recognized immediately. William Spencer, who had served since my grandfather's era, and Elizabeth Chen, Arthur's wife, who had joined the board 3 years earlier. They turned as we approached, their expressions revealing the complex history underlying today's business discussion. Julia, William acknowledged with formal cordiality. At 82, he remained remarkably sharp, his stooped posture belying the incisive mind that had helped guide Cartwright through multiple market cycles. It's been quite some time. Good to see you, William, I replied with genuine respect. This is Elena Mirza, Prism's co-founder and CTO. Elizabeth moved forward to greet us with significantly more warmth. Julia, Elena, Arthur has spoken so highly of what you've built at Prism. Today's discussion should be fascinating. The deliberate use of fascinating rather than something more conventionally positive suggested Elizabeth maintained professional neutrality regarding the competing options despite her husband's investment in Prism. As Arthur's wife, she had recused herself from leading any committee evaluations involving our company, but her perspective would inevitably influence board dynamics. My father guided us toward the boardroom with practiced authority. We have about 20 minutes before the formal session begins. Marcus, why don't you and Julia review presentation sequencing while I greet the remaining directors? The Cartwright boardroom embodied the firm's traditional aesthetics: rich mahogany paneling, oil paintings of significant historical clients, and the massive oval table that had witnessed 7 decades of consequential decisions. As Marcus and I reviewed our coordinated presentation approach, I noticed the meticulous preparation evident in the room's arrangement. Board materials perfectly aligned at each position, the technical setup for our presentation already tested and functioning, water carafes and crystal glasses positioned with military precision. Dad's been personally overseeing every detail since 6 this morning, Marcus noted, following my gaze. He's approaching this with the same intensity he brought to the Asian expansion decision 10 years ago. That was the defining strategic pivot of his leadership era, I observed. Exactly. And he views this technology decision as potentially equally significant. his final major strategic legacy before eventual succession planning. This framing added another dimension to the day's dynamics. Beyond the immediate business decision and family reconciliation aspects, today's choice represented a capstone moment in my father's professional identity, a defining statement about how Cartwright Financial would navigate the industry's technological transformation under his concluding leadership. Board members began filtering into the room, creating the subtle shift in atmosphere that occurs when individual executives transform into a collective governance body. I recognized most from my earlier years at Cartwright: Harold Winters from Northern Trust, Patricia Montgomery from the regulatory sector, James Wilson from client relationship management. New additions included Sophia Reeves, a technology executive from the banking sector, and Michael Harrison, who led a prominent family office serving ultra-high-net-worth clients. David arrived precisely 5 minutes before the scheduled start, immaculately dressed and carrying a leather portfolio embossed with the Cartwright logo. His expression betrayed tension beneath professional composure as he nodded acknowledgement toward me before taking his assigned seat near the presentation area. At precisely 10 o'clock, my father called the meeting to order with the formal protocol that had governed Cartwright board proceedings for generations. Good morning, directors. Today's special session addresses strategic options for technological enhancement and organizational positioning. We'll consider 2 specific pathways: acquisition by Henderson Wealth Management or technological partnership with Prism Technologies. The deliberate pairing of options without hierarchical ordering demonstrated my father's commitment to balanced evaluation rather than predetermined advocacy. He continued with practiced authority. We'll begin with a comprehensive assessment of our current technological position and client retention projections under both scenarios, presented by Julia Morgan, CEO of Prism Technologies. Following Julia's presentation, Marcus will outline implementation considerations for the partnership approach, and David will address client relationship implications. The formal introduction concluded. My father nodded toward me, transferring the floor with the subtle authority that had characterized his leadership style throughout his career. I moved to the presentation position with the calm confidence I had developed through years of venture capital pitches and industry keynotes, though the significance of presenting to this particular board created underlying intensity unlike any previous professional moment. Thank you, Robert. Good morning, directors. I began with professional formality, activating the first visualization on the room's display system. Cartwright Financial stands at a critical inflection point, one faced by wealth management firms across the industry. Traditional advisory models built on personal relationships and established expertise must now integrate technological capabilities that clients increasingly expect while maintaining the human judgment and trust that distinguish premium wealth management services. For the next 30 minutes, I presented a comprehensive analysis that moved methodically from industry context through specific Cartwright challenges to detailed comparisons of the acquisition and partnership approaches. The assessment included concrete metrics on client expectations, competitor capabilities, implementation timelines, and most significantly, projected client retention outcomes under both scenarios. The differential impact on client relationships represents perhaps the most significant finding from our assessment, I explained, highlighting the dramatic visualization of diverging retention curves. Under the acquisition scenario, our analysis projects 31% client attrition over the first 5 years post-transaction, representing approximately $2 billion in assets under management. This attrition occurs despite Henderson's strong brand presence and transitional communications. I advance to the partnership projection. By contrast, the technological enhancement approach shows just 12% attrition over the same period, with the curve flattening significantly after year 3 as client adoption reaches critical mass. The preserved relationships represent not just maintained revenue, but continued multi-generational engagement, with families who have trusted Cartwright for decades. Harold Winters, known for his skeptical questioning, leaned forward slightly. These projections seem remarkably favorable to the partnership approach. What underlying assumptions drive such significant differentiation? A valid question, I acknowledged, having anticipated this exact challenge. The projections are based on documented outcomes from 8 comparable wealth management firms that have undergone either acquisition or technological transformation within the past 3 years. We've adjusted the baseline data to reflect Cartwright's specific client demographics, relationship longevity, and asset concentration patterns. I displayed the methodological documentation that Elena had meticulously prepared. The fundamental driver behind the differential is client perception of change magnitude. Acquisition represents comprehensive transformation, affecting both relationship structures and service delivery, while technological enhancement is perceived as service improvement within established relationship frameworks. Sophia Reeves, whose technology background made her assessment particularly significant, asked the logical follow-up. How confident are you in the implementation timeline for the partnership approach? Technology transitions notoriously exceed projected timeframes, particularly in traditional financial services environments. Another excellent question, I replied, advancing to the implementation risk analysis. We've incorporated 3 contingency scenarios with extended timelines and higher resistance factors. The display showed progressively conservative projections. Even under our most pessimistic assumptions, implementation extending to 18 months rather than 9, and adoption rates 40% below baseline, the partnership approach still outperforms acquisition by 12% on retention metrics. The presentation continued through security considerations, regulatory compliance frameworks, and financial projections for both scenarios. Throughout the technical discussion, I maintained balanced analysis rather than obvious advocacy, allowing the data to make the compelling case for partnership while acknowledging legitimate implementation challenges. As I concluded the formal assessment portion, Elizabeth Chen posed the question that transitioned naturally to Marcus's segment. Beyond the technical capabilities and client retention projections, successful implementation would require clear governance structures and decision frameworks. How would roles and responsibilities be defined in this potential partnership? That's precisely what Marcus will address next, I replied, gesturing toward my brother to take the presentation position. The implementation approach includes specific governance frameworks designed to maintain appropriate organizational boundaries while enabling effective integration. Marcus moved forward with the polished confidence that had always characterized his professional presence. Thank you, Julia. The implementation strategy addresses precisely the governance questions Elizabeth has raised: how we maintain clear organizational integrity while enabling effective technological transformation. For the next 20 minutes, Marcus outlined a comprehensive transition approach that combined technical migration methodology with organizational change management. His presentation emphasized the governance structure Rebecca had suggested during Sunday's dinner: a formal implementation committee with representatives from both organizations operating under explicit decision authorities and conflict resolution protocols. The critical success factor in any major transition is role clarity, Marcus explained, displaying an organizational framework that mapped existing Cartwright positions to specific implementation responsibilities. This governance structure maintains Cartwright's complete authority over client relationships and portfolio strategies, while enabling Prism's expertise in technological integration and system optimization. As Marcus concluded his portion, David moved to the presentation position with visible determination. The tension in his shoulders betrayed the emotional significance of this moment, though his voice remained professionally composed as he began. Client relationships represent Cartwright's most valuable assets, built through decades of trust, performance, and personal connection. He displayed testimonials from several significant client families. These relationships transcend transactional interactions to encompass multi-generational financial guidance during life's most significant transitions. What followed surprised. Me considerably. Rather than offering reluctant support for the partnership approach as I had anticipated, David presented a genuinely thoughtful analysis of how technological enhancement could actually strengthen client relationships when properly implemented. He shared specific examples from his client interactions, particularly with younger inheritors who had expressed increasing frustration with Cartwright's traditional reporting methods and limited digital engagement capabilities. The Hammond family represents a typical example of the generational expectations gap, David explained, displaying communication preferences across 3 generations of this significant client relationship. The founding generation values in-person meetings and comprehensive printed reports. Their children appreciate these traditional approaches, but increasingly request digital access to portfolio information. The grandchildren, now entering adulthood, expect seamless digital experiences comparable to their consumer technology interactions. He advanced to specific capability requirements. Successfully maintaining these multi-generational relationships requires simultaneously serving diverse communication preferences rather than forcing all clients into a single engagement model. The technological capabilities Julia outlined would enable this customization while maintaining the consistent financial guidance that distinguishes Cartwright from algorithm-driven alternatives. His presentation concluded with a particularly effective visualization, showing how enhanced technological capabilities would actually increase meaningful client interactions rather than diminishing the human element of wealth management. Technology handling routine reporting and analysis functions frees our advisors to focus on the strategic and emotional aspects of wealth management that truly require human judgment, the elements that have always distinguished Cartwright in the marketplace. As David returned to his seat, I caught his gaze briefly, offering a subtle nod of professional appreciation for his unexpectedly substantive contribution. His presentation had evolved significantly from the reluctant participation I had anticipated to genuine engagement with the strategic possibilities, suggesting Sunday's dinner had influenced his perspective more profoundly than his departing demeanor had indicated. My father resumed control of the meeting with practiced authority. Thank you, Julia, Marcus, and David, for these comprehensive presentations. We'll now open the floor for board discussion and questions about both strategic options. What followed was among the most substantive governance discussions I had ever witnessed. Thoughtful questions about implementation risks, financing considerations, cultural implications, and competitive positioning. Board members engaged deeply with both options, challenging assumptions and probing potential vulnerabilities with the thoroughness appropriate to a decision of this magnitude. Particularly notable was my father's approach throughout this discussion. Rather than advocating for either option, he facilitated balanced consideration, ensuring every perspective received appropriate attention. His questions to me about the partnership approach were as challenging as his questions to those favoring the Henderson acquisition, demonstrating genuine commitment to thorough evaluation rather than predetermined outcome. As the discussion approached its second hour, William Spencer, the board's most senior member, posed the fundamental question underlying the technical and financial considerations. Beyond the impressive analytics and projections, this decision ultimately reflects our vision of Cartwright's future identity. Do we envision ourselves as an independent firm evolving through technological transformation, or as a valuable component within Henderson's larger enterprise? Both represent legitimate paths with different implications for the Cartwright legacy. The question hung in the air momentarily, its philosophical nature transcending the technical discussions that had dominated the meeting. My father nodded, acknowledgement of its significance before responding. William raises the essential consideration. Numbers and projections provide necessary guidance, but insufficient wisdom for decisions of this magnitude. The board must ultimately determine which path better serves not just shareholder value, but the multi-generational client relationships and organizational values that define Cartwright Financial. He paused, surveying the room with the measured authority that had guided Cartwright through multiple economic cycles and industry transformations. Having considered both options extensively, I believe technological partnership represents the superior path for preserving Cartwright's distinctive value while evolving to meet changing market expectations. However, this decision properly belongs to the collective wisdom of this board rather than any individual perspective, including my own. This measured endorsement, acknowledging his preference while respecting the board's ultimate authority, reflected my father's sophisticated leadership approach. It provided direction without dictating outcome, influence without commandeering the governance process. After additional discussion clarifying specific implementation questions, Elizabeth Chen moved the proceedings toward conclusion. I believe we've conducted comprehensive evaluation of both options. Unless there are additional considerations, I move that we proceed to board determination. The formal vote that followed reflected the thoroughness of the preceding discussion, not unanimous but decisively in favor of pursuing the partnership approach with Prism rather than accepting Henderson's acquisition offer. 10 directors supported partnership, 3 favored acquisition, and 1 abstained, creating a clear mandate for moving forward with the technological transformation strategy. My father acknowledged the decision with appropriate governance formality. The board has determined that Cartwright Financial will pursue technological enhancement through partnership with Prism Technologies rather than acquisition by Henderson Wealth Management. We will proceed immediately with formal implementation, planning while communicating our decision appropriately to all stakeholders. As the meeting concluded and board members began gathering their materials, individual conversations reflected the significance of the decision just rendered. Some directors approached me directly, offering congratulations tinged with cautionary reminders about implementation challenges. Others engaged with my father about communication strategy for declining Henderson's offer while maintaining professional relations with an important industry peer. David, whose presentation had contributed meaningfully to the board's decision, despite his earlier resistance, approached with carefully maintained professional composure. Congratulations! The retention projections were particularly compelling. Thank you, I acknowledged, recognizing the significance of his initiative in approaching me first. Your insights about client communication preferences across generations added important context to the technical discussion. He nodded slightly, a hint of his characteristic defensiveness returning. Just representing what I hear from actual clients. The technology means nothing if it doesn't serve real relationship needs. Absolutely agree, I replied, recognizing his need to assert domain expertise. Implementation success will depend on aligning technical capabilities with specific client expectations, exactly the knowledge you've developed through direct relationship management. This acknowledgement of his essential contribution seemed to ease the tension slightly. The governance framework Marcus outlined, with clear separation between technical implementation and client relationship management, that's non-negotiable if this is actually going to work. Completely aligned on that, I confirmed. Role clarity benefits everyone. Prism provides technological infrastructure and implementation support, while Cartwright maintains complete authority over client relationships and investment strategies. Our conversation was interrupted by my father's approach, his expression reflecting professional satisfaction, tempered by awareness of the significant work ahead. The board has made a consequential decision today. Now begins the equally challenging implementation phase. He looked between David and me with deliberate inclusiveness. This will require effective collaboration across both organizations, with clear communication and consistent alignment. The governance framework Marcus presented provides solid foundation for that collaboration, I noted. We can formalize the implementation committee structure immediately to maintain momentum. Good. My father nodded approval. David, I'd like you to represent client relationship considerations on that committee. Your perspective will be essential for ensuring the technological implementation serves actual client needs rather than theoretical capabilities. The deliberate inclusion addressed David's core concern about marginalization while simultaneously acknowledging his legitimate expertise. His expression revealed complicated emotions beneath professional acknowledgement. Of course, I'll ensure the client perspective remains central throughout implementation. As the boardroom gradually emptied, leaving just family members and Elena, my father addressed us with uncharacteristic philosophical reflection. Today's decision represents more than a technological strategy. It reflects a fundamental belief that Cartwright's independence and distinctive approach to wealth management deserve preservation through evolution rather than absorption. He turned toward me with direct acknowledgement that transcended professional courtesy. "Julia, your assessment provided the analytical foundation for this decision, but more significantly, your vision 5 years ago has been validated through practical implementation. The board has recognized what I should have acknowledged much earlier, that technological transformation represents necessity rather than optional enhancement in today's wealth management environment." The statement represented my father's most direct acknowledgement of his earlier misjudgment, offered not as personal apology, but as professional recognition within the context of organizational leadership. I accepted it with corresponding professionalism. Different strategic perspectives often require practical demonstration before their value becomes fully apparent. Prism's implementation experience will help ensure Cartwright's transformation proceeds efficiently rather than through trial and error. As we prepared to leave the boardroom, Marcus summarized the day's significance with characteristic perceptiveness. Beyond the specific decision, today represents a fundamental shift in how Cartwright approaches strategic challenges, balancing traditional strengths with emerging capabilities, maintaining independence through adaptation rather than resistance. That philosophical evolution may ultimately prove more significant than the specific technological implementation. His observation captured the deeper implications beneath the formal board determination. Today's decision wasn't merely about technological enhancement or organizational structure. It represented a bridge between preservation and transformation, between honoring legacy and embracing evolution. For both Cartwright Financial and our family, it created potential for reconciliation that acknowledged different paths while recognizing shared fundamental values. As I gathered my materials to return to Prism's offices, my father extended an unexpected invitation. "Your mother suggested a small family dinner this evening to acknowledge today's decision. Nothing formal, just immediate family reflecting on what this partnership means for Cartwright's future and our family's continued involvement with the firm." The invitation signaled his desire to integrate the business reconciliation with personal reconnection, to acknowledge the interrelated nature of professional and family identities that had characterized the Cartwright experience across generations. "I'd appreciate that," I replied, recognizing both the practical significance of consolidating today's momentum and the emotional importance of reestablishing family connections severed during the professional estrangement. Leaving Cartwright's offices that afternoon carried entirely different emotional resonance than my departure 5 years earlier. Then I had walked away with determination tinged with regret, conviction mixed with sadness at familial disappointment. Today, I departed with professional satisfaction enhanced by personal reconciliation, independence strengthened rather than compromised by reconnection. The children's table slight that had catalyzed this transformation now seemed almost providential. A momentary relegation that had ultimately created space for more meaningful inclusion, recognition that transcended hierarchical positioning to acknowledge distinctive contribution. My mother's careful arrangements for the anniversary dinner had inadvertently initiated a reconciliation process that formal business negotiations alone could never have accomplished. As I stepped into the autumn sunshine outside Cartwright's building, I noticed Richard Henderson himself entering the lobby, presumably for a previously scheduled meeting with my father to receive formal notification of the board's decision. His expression revealed no recognition as we passed, though within hours he would understand precisely how his acquisition strategy had been redirected by the partnership approach his aggressive counteroffers had attempted to prevent. The observation reminded me that today's decision, while significant, represented merely the beginning of implementation challenges that would test both organizations' commitment to effective collaboration. The partnership's success would depend on translating board-level strategic alignment into operational integration, transforming philosophical agreement into practical cooperation across teams with different histories, priorities, and organizational cultures. Yet, as I walked toward Prism's offices to brief our team on the board's decision, I felt genuine optimism about the path ahead. The partnership created opportunity for both organizations to evolve toward capabilities neither could develop independently. Cartwright, gaining technological sophistication while maintaining relationship excellence; Prism accessing established client relationships while refining implementation methodologies. More personally, it created potential for family reconciliation that acknowledged different paths while recognizing shared fundamental values. The vision for excellence, commitment to integrity, and determination to evolve that had characterized Cartwright across generations, regardless of the specific vehicles through which these values found expression. 6 months after the Cartwright board's momentous decision, I stood in the observation gallery overlooking Prism's expanded operations center, watching our implementation teams navigate the final phase of the Cartwright technology integration. The vast open workspace hummed with focused energy as engineers, client experience specialists, and data migration experts coordinated the overnight cutover that would complete the most ambitious partnership in either company's history. Elena joined me at the railing, coffee in hand despite the late hour. Final validation tests are all green. We're officially go for transition at midnight. I nodded, scanning the room where dozens of specialists worked through detailed checklists developed over months of preparation. Client communication sequences ready? Automated notifications programmed and advisor scripts distributed. The moment the system goes live, every client will receive their personalized welcome message through their preferred communication channels. The thoroughness reflected 6 months of meticulous planning, beginning immediately after the board's decision with the formation of the implementation committee that had guided every aspect of the integration. What had begun as a theoretical governance framework had evolved into an effective collaborative structure that balanced technical requirements with client relationship priorities. Marcus just texted, I told Elena, checking my phone. The Cartwright team is fully prepared on their end. David's conducting final briefings with the relationship managers to ensure consistent messaging tomorrow when clients begin accessing the new platform. Elena smiled slightly at the mention of David. His involvement has been surprisingly constructive these past few months. The client journey mapping sessions he led significantly improved our onboarding sequences. He found his lane, I acknowledged. Once it became clear that the technology would enhance rather than threaten his client relationships, his resistance transformed into constructive engagement. This evolution had been among the most remarkable developments of the implementation period. David's initial hostility had gradually yielded to cautious participation and eventually enthusiastic advocacy as he recognized how the platform would strengthen his position with next-generation clients rather than diminishing his role. His detailed knowledge of client communication preferences and relationship dynamics had genuinely enhanced our implementation approach, creating reciprocal value that reinforced the partnership's foundational premise. We should head to the command center, Elena suggested, checking her watch. T-minus 40 minutes until cutover, and I want to review the rollback protocols one final time. We made our way through the bustling workspace to the glass-walled command center, where key leaders from both organizations had gathered for the culminating moment of the integration process. My father stood beside Marcus, reviewing dashboard, displays that monitored every aspect of the transition. Though technically retired from daily operations since passing the CEO position to Marcus 3 months earlier, he had remained actively engaged in the partnership implementation, attending weekly steering committee meetings and providing valuable historical context about Cartwright's client relationships. "Julia," he greeted me with the increased warmth that had characterized our interactions since the reconciliation began. "Everything looks remarkably well orchestrated. The validation metrics are exceeding even our optimistic projections." "The preparation has been thorough," I acknowledged. "Both teams have executed the implementation plan with exceptional discipline. Credit to the governance framework," Marcus noted. "Clear decision authorities and escalation protocols prevented the ambiguity that typically derails complex integrations." The framework he referenced had proven perhaps the most valuable component of our implementation approach. By establishing explicit boundaries between Prism's technical responsibilities and Cartwright's client relationship authorities, we had created collaborative space that minimized territorial conflicts while enabling effective coordination. Weekly steering committee meetings had addressed integration challenges through structured problem-solving rather than political positioning, gradually building trust between teams with different organizational cultures and historical perspectives. David arrived moments later, having concluded his final briefing with Cartwright's relationship management team. "Advisors are fully prepared for tomorrow's client interactions," he reported. "We've role-played the most likely questions and scenarios, with particular focus on the security enhancements and portfolio visualization capabilities that will be most immediately visible to clients." "Excellent," my father nodded approval. "The first 48 hours will largely determine client perception of the entire transition. Consistent messaging across all advisors is essential." As midnight approached, technical teams completed final validation protocols while operations specialists positioned themselves for the carefully orchestrated cutover sequence. At precisely 11:55, Elena called the room to attention for final coordination. "We are go for transition in 5 minutes," she announced, her calm authority focusing the energy of the gathered specialists. "All teams confirm readiness." System architects, database administrators, security specialists, and client experience managers provided sequential confirmation, their crisp acknowledgments reflecting the disciplined preparation that had characterized the entire implementation process. "Cartwright confirms readiness," Marcus added, speaking for their organization. "All advisors and support personnel have been notified to expect system transition at midnight, with client communication sequences initiating at 6 a.m. At exactly midnight, Elena gave the formal command, "Execute cutover sequence." For B, the next 30 minutes, we watched as technical teams methodically transferred Cartwright's client data and portfolio management functions to the Prism platform, executing the carefully choreographed migration plan developed over months of preparation. Status indicators across multiple displays transitioned from amber to green as each component successfully activated, the complex technological orchestra performing precisely as designed. At 12:37, the final validation protocol completed successfully. Elena turned to the leadership team with professional satisfaction. "Migration complete. All systems operational. We are officially live on integrated platform." A moment of collective relief swept through the command center, though discipline prevented outright celebration. The technical transition represented merely the beginning of the more challenging human adaptation that would determine the partnership's ultimate success. "Excellent work by all teams," my father acknowledged, his measured approval reflecting decades of leadership experience. "Now begins the equally important process of helping clients and advisors embrace these new capabilities." His observation captured the essential challenge ahead. Technical integration, while complex, followed predictable patterns with definable success metrics. Cultural integration, helping Cartwright's traditionally minded advisors effectively leverage the new technological capabilities while maintaining their relationship-focused identity, represented the more nuanced implementation challenge. As our Technical teams initiated standard post-migration monitoring protocols. The leadership group moved to a private conference room for reflective discussion before the next day's intensive client engagement phase began. 6 months ago, many considered this partnership technically feasible but culturally impossible, Marcus observed, referencing the skepticism that had followed the initial board decision. The conventional wisdom suggested Cartwright's traditional approach and Prism's technological orientation would prove incompatible in practice. Conventional wisdom often underestimates the possibility of constructive integration across different perspectives, my father replied, his philosophical tone reflecting the increased reflectiveness that had characterized his approach since semi-retirement, particularly when those perspectives share fundamental commitments to client value and integrity. David, who had experienced perhaps the most significant evolution in perspective throughout the implementation process, offered unexpected insight. The key was creating space for different types of contribution rather than forcing hierarchical comparison. The governance framework legitimized multiple forms of expertise instead of privileging either technology or relationship management. His observation demonstrated remarkable self-awareness about the dynamics that had initially fueled his resistance. By establishing parallel value streams, technological sophistication and relationship excellence, the partnership had created space for distinctive contributions rather than forcing zero-sum competition for relevance. That balanced approach extends beyond implementation to our ongoing operational model, I noted. The Joint Management Committee structure establishes continued coordination without compromising either organization's independent identity. Elena nodded agreement. It's essentially a federated model rather than a merged one, maintaining separate organizational structures while creating effective interfaces at key decision points. The model she referenced had evolved from our initial governance framework into a sustainable operational approach that would guide ongoing partnership activities following the technical integration. Rather than forcing artificial organizational merger, we had established focused collaboration mechanisms around specific value creation opportunities while maintaining clear boundaries around each company's core capabilities. As we concluded our midnight discussion and prepared for the intensive client engagement activities planned for the following day, my father suggested a brief moment of recognition before departing. Before we disperse, I want to acknowledge what this successful integration represents beyond its technical accomplishments. 6 months ago, this partnership faced skepticism from multiple directions. Industry analysts questioning its feasibility, Henderson publicly predicting its failure, even internal voices expressing reservation about our ability to bridge the cultural divide between traditional wealth management and technological innovation. He looked around the room with the measured authority that had defined his leadership across decades. Tonight's successful transition doesn't merely validate a technical implementation plan. It demonstrates the possibility of evolutionary transformation that preserves essential legacy while embracing necessary innovation. Both organizations have emerged stronger through this collaboration, creating capabilities neither could have developed independently. His assessment captured the partnership's most significant achievement, transcending the false dichotomy between preservation and transformation to demonstrate how thoughtfully integrated perspectives could create superior outcomes to either tradition without innovation or disruption without foundation. The following morning brought the most visible manifestation of this integrated approach, as Cartwright clients accessed their newly enhanced digital experience for the first time. From the Prism observation gallery, I watched our clients support Teams field calls, respond to messages, and monitor usage patterns across the platform. The anticipated surge materialized as expected, but with notably positive sentiment as clients discovered capabilities they had long desired but previously lacked access to through Cartwright's traditional systems. By mid-morning, David called with preliminary feedback from relationship managers. The response has been overwhelmingly positive, particularly from next-generation clients. The portfolio visualization features and scenario modeling tools are generating significant engagement. Several major clients have already scheduled follow-up meetings to explore additional capabilities. That's excellent, I replied, genuinely pleased by this early validation. Any friction points we should address immediately? Some of the older clients are requesting additional guidance on navigation, but that's being addressed through the assisted onboarding sessions we scheduled. Otherwise, it's remarkably smooth considering the scale of the transition. His assessment aligned with the monitoring data flowing through our support systems, higher than normal inquiry volume but predominantly focused on capability exploration rather than problem resolution. The pattern suggested curiosity and engagement rather than confusion or resistance, precisely the client response we had hoped to generate. By afternoon, enough data had accumulated to conduct preliminary analysis of the transition's effectiveness. I joined Elena in the Analytics Center where visualization displays tracked client engagement metrics across demographic segments and wealth tiers. The adoption curve is exceeding our projections by approximately 17%, she observed, highlighting user activation rates across different client categories. Particularly notable is the engagement from traditionally reluctant segments. Clients over 70 are activating and exploring the platform at nearly twice the expected rate. That reflects the effectiveness of David's pre-transition communication strategy, I noted, recognizing how his insistence on personalized preparation for conservative clients had influenced our approach. The advisor-led introduction created confidence that might have been absent with a purely technical onboarding sequence. The observation reinforced the partnership's fundamental premise that technological capabilities delivered through trusted human relationships would produce superior outcomes to either technology without relationship context or relationships without technological enhancement. As the first day of client engagement concluded, Marcus hosted an integration debriefing at Cartwright's offices, bringing together leadership teams from both organizations to assess the transition's initial impact. The atmosphere reflected professional satisfaction tempered by awareness that successful launch represented merely the beginning of the more substantive transformation ahead. The technical implementation has exceeded expectations by every metric, Marcus acknowledged, displaying adoption and satisfaction data from the first 12 hours. But the more significant indicators involve advisor adoption patterns and their effectiveness in guiding clients through new capabilities. He highlighted usage statistics showing how Cartwright's relationship managers were leveraging the platform's analytical capabilities during client interactions. The average advisor has already utilized 3 advanced features during client conversations today: scenario modeling, tax optimization analysis, and intergenerational transfer planning. This suggests they're embracing the tools as enhancement rather than replacement for their expertise. This behavioral shift represented perhaps the most significant validation of our implementation approach. Rather than resisting the technological capabilities as threats to their value proposition, Cartwright's advisors were actively incorporating them into client interactions, using the tools to demonstrate enhanced expertise rather than feeling displaced by automation. My father, who had been observing client interactions throughout the day, offered characteristic perspective that connected immediate observations to longer-term implications. Today's interactions reveal how fundamentally client expectations have evolved, even among our most traditional relationships. They increasingly value wealth managers who combine human judgment with technological sophistication rather than forcing choice between relationship quality and analytical capabilities. His assessment aligned with the market evolution I had identified 5 years earlier when proposing Cartwright's technological transformation: the growing expectation for both and rather than either or in wealth management services. What had seemed theoretical then had become undeniably practical, as demonstrated by the enthusiastic client response to capabilities that enhanced rather than replaced the human advisory relationship. As the debriefing concluded, David approached with unexpected openness. I need to acknowledge something. When this partnership was first proposed, I viewed it primarily as a threat to my position, to Cartwright's identity, to the relationship-centered approach I valued. I was wrong. The admission, offered without prompting and in a professional setting rather than private conversation, carried particular significance given his earlier resistance. "What changed your perspective?" I asked, genuinely curious about his evolution. "Watching clients interact with these capabilities today," he replied thoughtfully. "They weren't choosing technology over relationship. They were experiencing enhanced relationships through technology. Their trust in their advisors actually increased when they could see complex scenarios visualized instantly, rather than waiting days for analysis." His observation captured the partnership's most significant achievement, transcending the false opposition between technological sophistication and human relationship to demonstrate how their integration created superior client experience to either element in isolation. As implementation activities gradually transitioned to ongoing operations over subsequent weeks, the partnership's impact extended beyond client experience to affect both organizations' developmental trajectories. Prism gained invaluable insights about wealth management relationship dynamics that enhanced our platform's capabilities across all client implementations. Cartwright developed technological fluency that transformed not just their service delivery, but their organizational culture, creating receptivity to innovation that extended beyond the specific platform capabilities. Particularly notable was the evolution in how each organization viewed the other's core expertise. Rather than technology versus relationship management as competing value propositions, both teams increasingly recognized their complementary nature, how technological capabilities enhanced relationship value, while relationship context made technology more relevant and impactful. 3 months after the initial transition, with the integration firmly established as successful by every measure, my father suggested a private dinner to reflect on the partnership's broader implications. We met at a quiet restaurant away from both companies' offices, creating space for conversation that transcended immediate operational considerations. "The client retention projections from your original assessment have proven remarkably accurate," he observed after we had ordered. "Not only have we maintained relationships that might have migrated during an ownership transition, we've actually expanded several major client engagements through new capabilities. The additional services revenue has exceeded even our optimistic projections," I acknowledged. "Clients are utilizing advanced planning features that create value beyond traditional portfolio management." My father nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Beyond the business metrics, I've been reflecting on the broader lessons from this partnership experience, particularly regarding the false choices that often dominate strategic thinking. Such as the presumed opposition between innovation and tradition, for one. Conventional wisdom suggests organizations must either maintain established approaches or embrace disruptive transformation, that middle paths inevitably fail through indecision." He paused, considering his next words carefully. "Yet, this partnership has demonstrated something more nuanced, that thoughtful integration of different perspectives can create superior outcomes to either extreme position." His philosophical reflection revealed how deeply he had considered the partnership's implications beyond its immediate business results. "That balanced approach extends beyond business strategy," I suggested. "It applies equally to family dynamics and generational transition." "Precisely," he agreed, his expression warming. 5 years ago, I viewed your different path as rejection of Cartwright traditions rather than evolution of their underlying principles. I failed to recognize how your technological vision actually honored the fundamental client commitment that has always defined our approach, merely through different methods. This acknowledgement, framing my separate path as evolution rather than rejection, represented perhaps the most significant personal reconciliation that had emerged through the partnership process. The core values remained consistent, I noted. Client focus, integrity, excellence. Only the implementation methods diverged. Yet method matters, my father countered thoughtfully. When our board chose partnership over acquisition, we weren't merely selecting a technical approach. We were making a fundamental statement about Cartwright's identity. That we value independence, evolutionary development, and integrated capabilities that combine our traditional relationship excellence with necessary technological sophistication. His assessment connected the business decision to more fundamental questions about organizational purpose and legacy that transcended immediate operational considerations. That clarity about fundamental identity creates foundation for innovation without disorientation, I observed. Knowing what must be preserved creates security for exploring what can be transformed. Our conversation continued through dinner, weaving between specific partnership outcomes and broader reflections about family business dynamics, generational transition, and the integration of personal and professional identities. As we concluded the evening, my father raised his glass in a subtle toast that encompassed both business accomplishment and personal reconciliation. To partnerships that enhance, rather than diminish, distinctive contribution, he offered. And to family relationships that recognize different paths toward shared values. The sentiment captured the essence of what had emerged through this unexpected journey from estrangement to collaboration, recognition that differences in approach, when guided by shared fundamental commitments, could create complementary strength rather than irreconcilable opposition. 6 years after declining the expected position at Cartwright Financial to pursue my own technological vision, and 6 months after the partnership that had reconciled these divergent paths, I found myself in a position I could never have anticipated during those early days of separation. Prism continued its independent growth trajectory, expanding beyond wealth management to provide technological transformation services across the financial services sector. Cartwright maintained its distinctive identity and relationship excellence while embracing technological capabilities that enhanced rather than diminished its traditional strengths. And our family, which had experienced painful division through professional disagreement, had discovered reconciliation through complementary contribution rather than hierarchical submission. David had found his distinctive value through relationship expertise that neither Marcus nor I possessed. Marcus had established leadership presence that honored our father's legacy while incorporating contemporary capabilities. And I had created technological innovation that enhanced rather than displaced the relationship values that had always defined the Cartwright approach. Most significantly, my parents, who had struggled to reconcile their traditional expectations with my different professional path, had discovered new appreciation for complementary contribution rather than conformity. My mother, always the family's emotional center, had facilitated this reconciliation through countless small gestures that rebuilt connection without demanding submission. My father, whose professional identity had been so thoroughly intertwined with Cartwright's traditional approach, had demonstrated remarkable evolution in recognizing how different methods could serve consistent values. The anniversary dinner that had begun this unexpected journey, with its momentary slight of seating me at the children's table, had inadvertently created the catalyst for transformation that formal business negotiations alone could never have accomplished. That symbolic relegation, intended to reinforce traditional hierarchy, had instead initiated a reconciliation process that transcended hierarchical positioning to establish more authentic recognition based on distinctive contribution, rather than conformity to predetermined paths. As I navigated both my continued leadership of Prism and my evolving relationship with Cartwright through our partnership structures, I found myself reflecting frequently on how developmental journeys rarely follow linear paths. The children's table, that seemingly small slight that had crystallized years of accumulated tension, had unintentionally created space for reconstruction that neither continued estrangement nor superficial reconciliation could have achieved. In that momentary relegation had emerged the catalyst for more authentic inclusion, recognition that transcended hierarchical position, to acknowledge distinctive value based on genuine contribution rather than familial obligation. Sometimes, it seemed, we must be temporarily set apart in order to find more authentic belonging on terms that honor both shared heritage and individual journey. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.